So this is your daily reminder from me that we know nothing. You have so much to learn. You thought you knew stuff, you're wrong. Because the world is filled with so much stuff that, one, has intentionally not been taught to us. Or two, like, if you're not looking for it, you might not necessarily know. So if you don't remember how messed up humanity is, I hope this series will remind you that history, the only thing we can count on it to be, is horrific. So our media does a fantastic job of educating people about these horrors and giving us new questions and things to learn about. So in this week's mini history corner, we're going to briefly unpack the guilty verdict of Guatemala's former dictator, Jose Efrain Rios Montt, during his genocide trial in Guatemala City, Friday, May 10th, 2013.
Which is way too soon. Like, that was too recent.
It was very recent. I would argue, like, I feel like people always think of or at least like in America, think of genocide as things that were a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This happened very recently.
Yeah.
So in the film that we watched, La Llorona, we got a glimpse into this history. And one thing that's really beautiful about the film, similar to how we got with Blood Quantum, is like it's talking about something that is real in this like fictional version of this world. So, you know, I will say in 2013, when I was 20, no idea that this was happening.
Not a clue.
Until I watched this film, I had no idea that this happened. I mean, I'd heard of genocide happening in the world, but I did not know that as recent as 2013 this took place, specifically in Guatemala. And I took from an article, The Nation, titled Guatemala's Genocide on Trial. And it's basically just a news story talking about the fact that this happened. And, you know, because it's so recent, we don't have so much of like, I guess like when we're thinking of history, this is something that happened recent enough where there is historical information about it, but it's still something that was recent enough that it's not necessarily like in our history books as of yet.
It's still developing.
So in this trial of Rios Montt, he was 86 at the time. The article outlines it as stemming from his 17-month rule in 1982 to 1983 after he grabbed power in a coup and then unleashed a bloody counterinsurgency against guerrilla uprising and its alleged civilian supporters in rural highlands. So it engulfed a lot of the country. The case focused specifically on the human rights crimes committed by Rios Montt's army and the Exil region of the Department of Quiche, where 1,771 indigenous Mayans were killed and some 29,000 displaced in a scorched earth strategy designed to destroy the Exil communities once and for all. I apologize if I'm saying that incorrectly, but hopefully I'm not. Essentially, the trial is outlining the like brutality that took place during this, and in the film you get like a glimpse of this trial, and it seems like it's pretty accurate in its depiction, because you have this man who is older, he's not in great health, but he definitely committed these crimes, and you're having like people who were victim to these crimes testifying, and you get this guilty verdict that is overturned essentially, which is actually what happened in real life. So the plan Victoria 82 was issued internally by Rios Montt in June 1982 that called for the annihilation not only of armed guerrillas, but of Mayan people who aided with food, shelter, and information. In the context of the regime's extreme anti-communist ideology, the Mayan population was identified as an internal enemy and therefore a legitimate target for military attack. The judge of the case, Barrios, described the consequences of that strategy when she read the verdict. The Exils were subjected to massacre and forced disappearance, systemic rape, the killing of children, women, and elderly, the burning of their homes, the slaughter of their animals, the destruction of their crops, massive displacement, and the death by hunger, sickness, bombings when they sought refuge in the mountains. So just really awful things happened. And by the time that they reached the verdict, was basically a rejection, which is very interesting that the government itself was rejecting the actions of former leaders, which I don't know if we always see that. I feel like, Gabe, when we were watching it, you were mentioning like, it's really interesting that they're putting a former leader on trial.
Yeah.
Because...
Well, it's just interesting that this government is putting the government on trial. Like, that a government is so... Like, it was peculiar because I was like, a government that's, you know, corrupt enough to have genocide in it, but simultaneously seeking justice. Like, it didn't, that didn't equal out to me, and which makes sense because ultimately it was overruled. So, or like, you know, they took it back. But I was like, that's so interesting. like you're, you know, you took 2 steps forward, but you are someone who was like already started way back there.
Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of like a contrast to what we see in America, in that, like, we kind of try to nationalism. We try to like glorify our past here.
Yeah.
And the atrocities it's not so much it's like, we don't want to talk about it. Like, you saw how Trump reacted to like race sensitivity training. So essentially, like, it's like trying to like just like pretend everything was glorious before, where it's more beneficial for healing if you acknowledge the awful that has happened and like take this and acknowledge and get justice for the people who it's happened to, and then like the country itself can start to heal. So that's, I guess, how the trial was kind of seen initially. And the verdict was a rejection of the Army's extreme cruelty. So the brutalization of these people. It was an acknowledgement that the systemic destruction of Mayan communities and the most radical expression possible of racism, social exclusion, and abuse that Guatemala's indigenous people had endured for hundreds of years, and was used as a way to restore like a measure of dignity to the victims and survivors by recognizing the totality of their historical experience instead of simply like the death, pain, and loss that each person suffered, is what the article kind of outlines. One thing that I read that really like bummed me out, but did not surprise me, is that the U.S. actually backed Rios Montt in his time. And I believe it was Reagan who called him, Reagan famously considered the dictator to be a totally dedicated to democracy and called him a man of great personal integrity and commitment.
Disgusting.
And I don't know why secret wars existed, but they did, with the United States, and it benefited the United States to back Guatemala in their war with, like the United States' secret war, according to this article, with, I believe, Nicaragua. So it was totally politically motivated. They actually provided lots of money and aid, the United States, to Rios Montt, and basically like backed him in his awfulness that he did. And obviously he was not the only one who did awful. There were other generals, and we get to see that a little bit in the film, that like once he is taken, spoilers, out, that essentially there are others who also have to atone, who have to pay and like, I guess, find this supernatural justice. But yeah, I obviously don't know everything about this. This is my first time learning about it. So I totally encourage our viewers to learn more themselves, find resources that give you information about this, because I honestly had no idea that, I mean, it was in the 80s, I believe, that this took place. So obviously it was not as recent as 2013, but I guess it's just like encouraging people to question. It took a long time for him to, like, he was just walking around free. 2013. So like, and it's, I guess, like finding justice for people who, yeah, they're old now, but it doesn't mean they didn't do those things. Like, it's like when you like come after people who are committed a crime in like the 20s, and they're like, we're not 20s, that's like way too early. But you get it, like the 40s, and they're old as heck now.
Yeah.
It's like they still committed that awfulness, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's like the Golden State Killer, where he finally got found out, thanks to Michelle McNamara. And like, he was very old, but he committed those crimes when he was a young police officer, like, and like got away with it for the majority of his life until the end, and was like super old on trial. Yeah. I think it's like, it feels a little too late. And it's hard to, because like, I get what they're saying, where it's like the trial is there to kind of like mend wounds. Because like, by that time, he is older. He's already dying. They're not really like, he's not going to go to jail. Like, he's not going to prison. And it really was like an act, more or less. Like, it's more to like give people something to feel like there's justice. But it really is like just that. It's just a spectacle.
Yeah.
Because like it's too little too late. Like, those people are already dead. That stuff has already happened to them. And it feels, you know, kind of disingenuous, but like, it's also nice that something happened, you know, like that.
Yeah. I think like looking at it for what it was and calling it out, like, I guess like the government admitting that, you know, something really awful took place under their rule, instead of like trying to, I guess, sugarcoat it, is a powerful thing.
Like America does.
Yeah. History, it was nothing but great. Make it great again. Because it's been great this whole time. And then you ask like, except for that. It's like, if there's an except for, it wasn't great, man.
there's a lot of except fors.
Here we are. But yeah, obviously that is not the whole story. There's obviously a lot more to that story, and I recommend people, you know, doing their own research and learning about it. After watching the film, I think it naturally lends like being curious about history that like I had no idea about.
Yeah.
So,
and like,
I encourage people to do the same.
There's like this, so there's that part of the story, and then there's La Llorona part of the story, right? So it's like this merging of things, because La Llorona is usually like when we talked about this, when we covered The Curse of La Llorona in our Latinx representation in horror series with Sergio Galliano, and we were really disappointed in that. But we talked about, you know, hearing of the tale of La Llorona, and because it was, you know, it's this woman who was like, it kind of takes on different things. It's similar to the Yurei in J-horror, where it was like, you know, it's a woman who is wronged or has wronged, and it's like she drowns her kids because her husband cheated on her, and now she's like cursed to keep drowning kids, or she lost her kids because of something, and she's cursed to drown because she's trying to save the kids, and it ends up being that she drowns them. But it's always like, it's this woman who has been wronged in some way. Yeah. And either that causes her to do this act, or she's like, you know, like either it causes her to do an evil act of like murder, or it's like that she's reacting to murder, you know? Yeah. And so now she's like terrorizing you. But a lot of the time, what she was terrorizing is like children. Like, they're the ones who are the victims, like, for forever. It's just like there's reciprocation of the violence that was done to her, which is kind of like when you think of like The Grudge, right? It's just that like when immense pain occurs in a place, it doesn't leave. Like, it's stuck there. And so then it just keeps going and acting out like those same pains and horrors, and just doing that over and over again, which is what she's doing, which I think for this film, it's interesting because it's not that, right? Like, we're finally seeing a
unique version.
Yeah. Like, we're seeing like she is finally focused on the right villain, like the right enemy. Like, she's not targeting other victims. She is targeting the actual monsters, the real monsters, like, you know, and doing that. And I think there's also this other level that we'll talk about in the film section of the other characters that are in it too, because, you know, there's not just like one side to the story. There's not just one element that we explore. But I figure, you know, for the facts section to kind of dabble in there, just a little crash course on what La Llorona is, so that you can do it. But I mean, usually it's just a cautionary tale for children to listen to their parents. Because that's what it is. Or it's just like, you know, the tale of you know, that it's hard being a woman because like it sucks sometimes and it's dangerous and you're just a mom and it's sad. And so I think it's an interesting take to use
for sure
and recraft this folklore into a political statement that would hopefully, you know, is similar to that, to the real life trial, is a cathartic experience. Like we can live out justice in some way.
Yeah. And I mean, if you think about, so in the film where we have who she's also like kind of giving these like dreams to the wife, and like you have like these interactions with the other characters. And if you think of like people who do monstrous things, who do horrible things, in horrific things in history, they have people who protect them. So
or make excuses for them.
For sure. Exactly. So I think it was really, I remember at the time I was like, why are they coming for the wife and the family? It's like they were not the ones who did it, but in a way they did not do it themselves, but they had been protecting this man. They had innocent. Been justifying his actions with themselves or to others. And I think not that it makes them necessarily as guilty, but they need their perspective changed. They need to recognize him for his awfulness and not protect him from justice for these people who have suffered. So I thought that was like really cool how they did that. It was like powerful to like have them turn on him, I guess, like to like get in their head, like they realized how awful he was. And I guess you could argue it's self-preservation, but I would also say like it was cool to like have his gross support system recognize him for how awful he was, and like kind of damn him like La Llorona was trying to do. So I thought that was cool.
And like, I mean, you mentioned it when we were watching it, that it reminded you of like how people feel about Melania and Trump. It's like she is not exempt. She is there. She's also there. She's witnessing it. She's a part of it. She is not excluded from like the horrors that family commits because she's right there.
And she's choosing to embrace the rose-colored version of what's being fed to her. She's not questioning it. Yeah. And that's a problem.
Yeah. It's like
it allows the behavior to continue.
Yeah. Like you have an obligation to, you know, question that and try to confront it. That's what it would mean to be like not innocent, but like to be the hero of that story, right? Is like to not be complacent with it. You have to actively go against it. Like we've said before, like pacificity, like not speaking out is just as bad as like doing the action. Like you're just as guilty because you're continuing to let that happen. So it makes you just as guilty. And I think that's an interesting part of this film, which we can get into.
Yeah.